Skúšame. Dobrý deň prajem všetkým. Dovoľte, aby sme sa ospravedlnili za krátku pauzu, ktorá je spôsobená len kontaktovaním sa s panelistami. Môžete mi potvrdiť, máme kontakt na panelistov z zahraničia, pána Bochslera, pána Michaela Cruza, pána Haralda Weilnböcka. Oni sú online. Nemáme žiadne informácie, takže...
Nič nie. Či sa pripojení? Som pripojený.
Jeden pán nie je zatiaľ. Už ide. Super. Tak, takže môžeme začať. Okay, good morning everyone. The Human
Dobré ráno
Forum,
všetkým,
the Human Forum 2021
ktorí sú na Human Forum
had its grand
2021.
opening, and I'm so happy to spend
Privítanie
this
sme už
beautiful day with
A ja
all of
som
you.
veľmi rád, že môžem spraviť tento krásny deň s vami.
My name is Peter Terem,
Volám sa Peter Terem
and I work as a professor at the Department of
som
International
profesorom
Relations and Diplomacy at the Faculty of Political Science and International Relations, Matej Bel University, Banská Bystrica. Rich and attractive two-day program is ahead of us. Allow me to welcome all of you to the first panel of Human Forum 2021, which is looking like a really great event. Due to the current pandemic situation, unfortunately, we were not able to meet face-to-face, and therefore we decided to organize this event in special hybrid form. So I would like to warmly welcome all those online attending this event, including our distinguished guests from abroad. We hope you have a good picture and sound reception. Additionally, we wish all of you stimulating and enjoyable event, which hopefully will lead to inspiring results. I believe we have good plan in realistic time frame for the discussion. I'll try to be a good timekeeper while taking into account the audience question as well. The main topic of this panel is manifestation of extremism in Slovakia and in the world, and their risks for the development of democracy. I know that today's topic may bring up a number of questions from you, and I'll try to do all my best to answer as many questions as I can in the time we have today. I'm delighted to be here with our fabulous guests, and let me introduce them. It's my honor to introduce Martin Klus, the State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of the Slovak Republic. And allow me to introduce them very briefly. Martin Klus is a Slovak professional political scientist and graduate of political theory. He holds a postgraduate diploma in theory of politics. Prior to entering Slovak politics, he worked as a university lecturer and political analyst, providing political analysis and commentaries to domestic and foreign media. Between the years 2013 and 2014, he ranked among the most cited Slovak political scientists and sociologists. Since 1999, he has been actively engaged in the non-profit sector with the aim to empower civic and student participation in public affairs, but also in activities leading to the improvement of the educational and urban environment. He often partakes in political and civic initiatives on the topic of electoral and referendum legislation. Martin Klus entered communal politics in Banská Bystrica in 2014. From 2016 to 2020, he served as a member of the National Council of the Slovak Republic. During the last 6 months of his tenure, he also served as the Deputy Speaker of the Slovak National Council. As of March 2020, he has become the State Secretary for the EU Affairs of the Slovak Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of the Slovak Republic. He is the Vice Minister for European Affairs and is also responsible for the Conference on the Future of Europe at the national level. Within the scope of building European resilience, the EU strategic foresight concept, he serves as the Ministry for the Future. Martin, welcome. Here.
Good morning to everybody. Thank you very much for warm welcoming. I learned a lot about myself just recently, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be in Banská Bystrica.
I warmly welcome Madam Adriana Vasiľková, Associate Professor from the Department of Political Science, Faculty of Political Science and International Relations, Matej University. Adriana, after graduating from the Faculty of Humanities at the Matej University in the field of history, German, he has been working at the Department of Political Science at the Faculty of Political Science and International Relations at the Matej University since 1999. In its pedagogical and scientific research activities, she focuses the field of comparative political science with emphasis on German-speaking European countries, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, with 4 countries, and Benelux countries. Also focuses on the issue of extremism, priority of right-wing extremism. She actively participates in the publishing and organizational activities of the Department of Political Science, participates in domestic and foreign conferences, teacher mobility, participates in project activities as well. As a part of the research on right-wing extremism, she participated as a leader in the so-called Vega project, socio-political background on the electoral support of the political party Kotleba People's Party of Slovakia. Currently, the leader of the Vega project, the socio-political background of support of selected political parties in the context of radicalization trends of society and the crisis of political parties. Another great participant in online space is Michael Cruz. Michael is representative of city of Oslo. He worked as a crime prevention coordinator. The city of Oslo model for crime prevention is referred to as the SOLTO model. It means together we create a safe Oslo. It is a cross-sectoral and collaborative model based on Scandinavian crime prevention. And the city of Oslo and the police have different functions in the efforts to create safe cities and prevent extremism, but collaborate closely on challenges and share information, resources, and common goals, preventing hate crime, radicalization, and violent extremism by meeting citizens with dialogue and building relationships in an open and reflective manner. Michael Cruz has been working with prevention of radicalization and violent extremism since 2011 in the Directorate of Integration and Diversity, 2008-2014, the Norwegian Police Security Service, 2014-2018, and currently he works as a crime prevention coordinator, head of group prevention unit. Michael is also co-writer of the publications Handbook on Concern, How Does One Prevent Hate Crime and Violent Extremism Among Young People, SALT Educational Toolkit for Schools, and National Guidelines on Concern, How Does One Prevent Radicalization and Violent Extremism. I also welcome Harald Weilnböck. I'm not sure if he's connected. Yeah, perfect. Harald works both as a practitioner and a researcher of good practice methods in prevention and rehabilitation in school and prison settings, focusing on right-wing extremism. He studied and worked in the US, France, Switzerland, and Germany, and received his PhD at University of California, Los Angeles. His professional degree in Leipzig in cultural and social research. Harald also completed training in group dynamic psychotherapy. In 2005, he co-founded the NGO Cultures Interactive, which has been working in the national Prevent programs as the current Live Democracy program. The Cultures Interactive, part of the network of excellency in preventing right-wing extremism. Harald also helped building up the EU's radicalization awareness network since its inauguration in 2011 and conducted numerous EU and national projects. Recently, Exit Europe projects and the CE Prevent Net project on Central and Eastern Europe. Harald widely published on pertinent issues. Last but not least, I would like to introduce Daniel Bochsler, Associate Professor in Nationalism Studies and Political Science at Central European University and Professor of Political Science at the University of Belgrade. He received his PhD in Political Science from the University of Geneva. His research deals with the effect of political institutions and social diversity, particularly with ethnic diversity, mostly in democracies in Central and Eastern Europe or worldwide. He has been an associate professor of political science at the University of Copenhagen, an assistant professor at the University of Zurich, and postdoctoral researchers at the Central European University. And he has been for research stays at the Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona, at the European University Institute in Fiesole, at the University of Barcelona, at the University of Tartu, Belgrade, at the University of California, at Irvine, and at the Central European University in Budapest. So, our discussion today will be divided into 5 thematic areas. The first one will be extremism, the content of the concept and its association in people's minds. The second one will be about extremism among young people and its manifestation. The third one deals with reasons for the attraction to extremism, causes of inclination to extremism, political, psychological, social approaches. The fourth one about forms of political extremism, left-wing, right-wing, religious, typical features which are present in the political views of the population. And the last one about how can liberal democracies be protected from political extremism at the local level. So, dear guests, the panelists, you are all high-quality experts for what you have achieved so far in your field of activity. So before we get to our individual thematic areas, please explain your professional activities in the context of the main topics of today's panel and the overall focus of the Human Forum 2021 conference. Please, Mr. State Secretary, or please, Madame Vasiľková.
Takže budem správať po slovensky. Aha. Téma extrémizmu je veľmi vážna v súčasnej dobe. Už to bolo povedané v tých úvodných predhovoroch, ktoré naozaj boli inšpiratívne a podstate možno niektoré veci aj my ako panelisti budeme ešte opakovať. Jedná sa v podstate o to, že extrémizmus ako fenomén je prítomný v každej spoločnosti, aj v demokratickej, pretože demokracia mu to umožňuje, aby tu bol, pretože demokracia je pluralita a umožňuje pluralitu názorov. Dôležité je ale povedať to, že demokracia ako taká by sa mala mať mechanizmy na svoju vlastnú obranu a obranu proti extrémizmu, ktorý v podstate tú demokraciu ako takú chce nejakým spôsobom narušiť, zničiť, eliminovať. A v posledných rokoch extrémizmus bol prítomný v každej historickej etape, od staroveku cez stredovek, novovek, len v súčasnosti sa o ňom oveľa viac hovorí, pretože výraznejšie zasahuje do našich životov. A tým, že my sme v podstate na Slovensku a v našom Banskobystrickom kraji, v našom regióne to bolo
and in our region it was a little bit more intensive because in some kind of way it becomes to National Council of Slovak Republic, and we will get to many questions, but I would like to say if we want to know extremism, we should know democracy and we should know how to protect it. And I think although it is said too much that many people don't know what is extremism, what the character of extremism is, and that leads into misinterpretations. And also it leads to negative phenomena. So I would like to say what I think extremism is, and also it's an honor to be here because that kind of discussions are very prosperous because we need to talk about this topic.
Thank you once again for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's quite tough to continue after such a fantastic introduction what the extremism mean if it comes to the democracy, but whenever anybody asking me if there is anything even small positive that Marian Kotleba became governor of the Banska Bystrica self-governing region, I'm always saying very simple answer. Only positive is that a group of fantastic people like you established Human Forum, and we are having 8th anniversary today, so I'm very happy for that. I can't see any other positives, except of all of us can now easily understand how fragile is democracy. And this is what we are dealing with at the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs as well. And my task, for instance, is to discuss so-called European Pact for Democracy, which is supposed to save us, at least partly, if it comes to radicalization of the society. And we are dealing also with issues heavily concerned or heavily interconnected, and we are heavily concerned if it comes to social networks like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and many others, because more than ever, if it comes to these platforms, we can use this well-known sentence that they are good servants but very bad lords. And unfortunately, we are facing critical situation all around us. And if it comes also to political situation in Slovakia, we can easily see how the radicalization looks like, especially now in the COVID-19 pandemic. And I will elaborate later on a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Dear guests, Daniel, Harald, Michael. So, if according to you, or please also explain very briefly your professional activities in the context of the main topic. Harald, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yet, first of all, I have to check with the sound quality whether that's that's working at all. If not, I just skip my intervention. I get one thumbs up. I hope I have to admit, due to a scheduling mistake, I'm caught on a train platform. So I try to make the best of it, but just cut me off in case this is just too troublesome for you. As for an opening statement, I would and I would tend to make it short, just because of my clumsy situation. Yeah, I would like to stress that the concept of violent extremism is a very political one, and I think we are best served if we are focusing on issues of human rights, democracy, and of group hatred and hate crime. So while relinquishing to a certain extent the logic that we have inherited from intelligence reports, which are always a logic of what threatens the state, and there's various fractions that seem to in fact do threaten the constitution and the state, and shifting from there rather to observing dynamics and tendencies that threaten other groups of people, and that's hate crime. Usually we don't have hate crime very well covered in intelligence reports. I think that is starting to change to a certain extent, but I think there's still some way to go on that. So I would suggest for us as practitioners and policymakers, focus on our orientation towards human rights violations, hate speech, and all the rest of it. That much for an introduction. Thank you.
Thank you for this introduction. Daniel, can you hear me?
I do. Shall I go on?
Yeah. So please also explain very briefly your professional activities in this.
Very gladly. I mean, first of all, thanks for inviting me into this very distinguished round of speakers. My expertise is more on the democracy side. And in the last couple of years, what you have previously, referred to, this difficult political situation which you experienced in the province of Banska Bystrica, seemed to become a global phenomenon. You couldn't open the international pages of a newspaper, of a quality newspaper, without reading about the crisis of democracy, the end of the liberal democratic era. We had presidents such as Donald Trump in the US. We still have Bolsonaro in Brazil, and we don't know whether and how the next elections will take place. This all culminated earlier this year in the storm of the Senate in the United States in Washington. And extremist political actors of the right or of the political left usually working, active within larger populist political parties. I don't want to claim here, we can discuss this later on, that populism and extremists are identical, but often when we have significant extremist actors in politics, they are embedded in larger political parties which are taking a populist course. And so the question which a whole range of scholars in comparative politics is looking at is the question whether populism, which is more prevalent as a significant political force, either as the largest opposition party or even in government in many countries. I don't need to speak to you in Slovakia about that. Whether this is a threat actually for democracy. And jointly with my co-author Andreas Huon at the ETH in Zurich, we have also looked at this question. And roughly speaking, you have two different types of arguments in the literature. One of the argument is that populism is really a threat to democracy because it's leader-oriented, because it's kind of, has missionary goals. Kind of, populists believe that their ideology is the only right one, and therefore could easily turn into despotic rule and abolish kind of, the freedoms which we have in democracy. But then there is another, which takes a more nuanced kind of, perspective on the consequences of populist rule on democracy, which are telling populists are unhappy with the way how democracies, liberal democracies today work. They say there is an overemphasis of liberal democracies on checks and balances, on kind of, all these liberal rights, on kind of, maybe excessive kind of, role of certain pro-government media. And what they say, they want instead to strengthen popular control. They want to have kind of, directly rely on the legitimacy of the people. So they don't necessarily want to unravel democracy. They just want to change the kind of, shift democracy into a different model. And if we think of democracy as a kind of, multi-layered phenomenon with many kind of, different aspects which are going into this package, they just say we put the wrong emphasis in liberal democracies. You have statistically then analyzed what are the consequences, what happens kind of, if populists are in power. I don't want to kind of, now present for the next 20 minutes all the numbers which we have found in coefficients and confidence intervals. Just very briefly, kind of, three major claims which I think we could report from our findings. First, it's not all the same. All populist governments, all populist oppositions, also they're different. They take different actions. Some of them are left, others are centrists, others are right. They function in different systems. So it's hard to really find kind of, homogeneous effects, which we could say are a general property of populism and which don't occur in non-populist systems as well. Second, where we do find effects is that populism seems to have a negative effect on the rule of law, and it seems to undermine media freedom in a lot of kind of, cases. And Slovakia would also be one of the cases which kind of, nicely fits into this picture. And third, we also find positive effects of populism, especially they strengthen the representation because in some cases they bring groups which previously were marginalized. I think, for instance, of the indigenous people in Latin America. But I also think of kind of, people who don't feel that they are attached any longer to politics in Western and Eastern European societies. They bring them back into the game. And this is an aspect which could also be understood as strengthening of democracy. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much. Michael, can you hear us?
Yes, greetings from Oslo.
Mike.
Thank you,
First
Maros
line
and Human Forum.
Yeah, thank you. You are first-line practitioner and coordinator of multi-agency work. So
Yes.
can you tell us something about your professional activities in the context of the main topics of today's panel?
Okay. I do not have a political ideological approach because I believe that's the role of the civic sector. So in order to work preventive in the field of extremism, I focus a lot on hate crime, hate speech, and intolerance, and also vulnerable factors that can cause radicalization. So because I work broadly with multi-agency, I also have access to services that are in contact with vulnerable people. Why I have this focus is because more than half of the extremists in Norway are left out of the labor market. It is a striking finding that so many extremists are left out an arena that generally provides many positive health effects. We can also see that there's a high prevalence of drug and substance abuse among extremist members, and also vulnerability linked to mental illnesses, development disorders, and adjustments problem. So when we have this knowledge, it's easier to have what you call it, early preventive measures. So that's the main focus I have in my job as a crime prevention coordinator. And I also work broadly with reducing juvenile crime and reducing alcohol and substance abuse. And like I mentioned, many of the extremist members, this is one of many of their what you call it, factors that we can see. And also that there are, to give an example, 83% are registered in the national database of criminal cases for having committed a crime. So when we work with universal preventive measures, it also can prevent radicalization.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for this interesting introduction. Now I would like to know what does the term extremism mean, according to our panelists. So what comes to your mind when someone say extremism? Adriana.
Pán profesor, ďalšiu otázku si mi nemohol dať. Samozrejme, ja som to už naznačila v úvode, úlohou nás, vysokoškolských pedagógov, je vlastne skúmať otázku, čo extrémizmus je. Nechcem tu, myslím, dlho hovoriť o tom, že aká bola genéza tohto pojmu, ale ak si ho zoberieme etymologicky, tak vychádza to z niečoho, čo je na póloch spektra, na tých krajných. Je to niečo, čo polarizuje, alebo je polarizujúce. Ano, a v súčasnosti v kontexte demokratických spoločností a systémov, ktoré síce nie sú dokonalé, ale ako povedal Churchill, sú asi to najlepšie, čo zatiaľ máme.
But it is the best what we have. So democracy is also in extremism, is opposite of democracy and principles of liberal democracy. So it is negative concept, because if somebody is pointed as extremism, he also tries to defend himself that is not the true. And from the politological view, is of course extremism tries to define towards democracy. These are two terms which are opposite to each other. But the basic question is, the extremism is multi-social phenomena. So it is in all layers of society, and also not in political sciences, but also in psychology and so on. So it is very hard to define the poem exactly, because, for example, if we ask psychologists for extremism, it is some attitude or way of behavior which is nowadays set in a society. And from the political point of view, is the behavior of some societies which tries to violate the democratic principles. But also we can talk about defining the extremism towards democracy. We also need to know what the democracy is. And if we globally define it, the democracy is defined different slightly, because the democracy is dependent according to various states where the social attitudes differs. And also, sometimes it's hard for us to say and point this is an extremistic attitude because it is hard to prove. But the science tries or attempts, and also the Central Europe is inspired by German society when defining extremism, because this definition is according to some principles, and also all the things which pass counter the democratic principles could be considered extremist.
Well, if it comes to the extremists, I can imagine the one who is threatening democracy in its very core. I mean, they're heavily abusing strong and weak sides of democracy. For instance, freedom of speech. That's a fantastic example. When I spoke about the social networks, about Facebook, for instance, which is the most well-known in Slovakia, let's take a look how these extremist guys are speaking about the freedom of speech all the time. And asking myself, and this is also the question, quite a tough question, I have to say, during our discussions about the European Pact for Democracy, if this freedom of speech has to be reserved and devoted also to bots or trolls or fake profiles, because these are the guys who are running the discussions most of the time at our social networks, and there is no clear answer. And me as a liberal, I'm having quite a tough situation in this moment, because of course freedom of speech is one of the most important freedoms we have. But on the other hand, if these guys are abusing this freedom of speech and they are using narrative which is against democracy, against human rights, against minorities, what we can do with that? So this is, from my point of view, extremism in very concrete situation 2021. And the question is how to deal with the problem. And I'm not that much sure if we are having simple answers. All of us remember grilling of Mr. Zuckerberg in United States Senate, in European Parliament. Why we are allowing these social platforms to have a special system which is giving advantage to populist news, shocking news, and fake news, just because they need to have a business, just because the reach is higher. So this is maybe the discussion which is in front of us, and I believe in 2022 we will find finally the rules which will help us to save our democracy, because as we can easily see during the presidential election 2019 in Slovakia, during the parliamentary election 2020, and during the vaccination campaign 2021, it's not a minority of people sometimes. It's unfortunately majority in some cases, and this is very, very terrifying me.
Thank you, Martin. Harald, what comes to your mind when someone says extremism, and what it is associated with in people's minds? And maybe you can explain us also what role does historical development, geography, and culture play in shaping extremism?
Well, thank you. And once again, sorry about the clumsy situation here. This is a very interesting discussion indeed. I very much appreciate that. First of all, underlining, as one speaker did, that we need to actually define what democracy is in the first place, and then think about what democratic practice is and what runs against it. On a different level, I would actually tend to say that defining extremism is really a very a simple thing on the operational level of a prevent worker. As I already hinted at in my small introduction, we are actually on the ground with young or not so young people we are dealing with very basic instincts of hate speech and group hatred against a certain group that's defined as being, the enemy. So you have very strict good and bad, black and white divisions. You have a concept of group hatred, and there's actually an academically sound concept that you might turn towards. It's called the group, not group hatred, but it's group-focused enmity, a somewhat clumsy term. I put you the link for that in the chat, and it gives you a definition of what it usually comes down to in social practice. That's enmity or hatred, against supposed others, which might be foreigners, or it might be disbelievers, unbelievers, or it might be, sexually differently oriented people or trans people. So there is a certain list of, or it might be homeless people or whatever. So on a practical level, it is actually quite easy to define how violent extremism, what it comes down to practically, and what, as a prevent worker, you have to actually prevent against, or create resilience against. There's just one further comment I'd like to make. It's a somewhat controversial one, since also Germany was just mentioned as a sort of a role model function here. I think one thing that we normally, but very often caught in our attempts to define extremism and what it is that we, as I said before, that we turn to intelligence reports, and intelligence reports usually just sort of line up what they have perceived in the past as the major threats of the state system, which is not entirely the same that the threats to democracy or to groups of population. And when I hear to our discussion, just count the numbers of times when we said right-wing extremism, left-wing extremism as sort of the two epitomes of and the symmetry of two extremisms. That is, in fact, if we look at it more clearly, empirically, that's not very helpful. As for Germany, I would tend to say, and that's the controversial part of my input, that there hasn't been any left-wing violent extremism worth the concept in the last 30 or something years. Plus, if you look at the ideological setup that, young people that commit delinquency, and that's the case, commit delinquency, like, smashing windows or whatever, in the name of a left-wing ideology. This ideology is actually in many aspects not against the Constitution. So things get very messed up if we leave ourselves turning to intelligence reports. I think we are much better off if we turn to the concept of group-focused enmity and social research of what hate crime actually comes down to in terms of which target groups are affected and in terms of which emotions and affects of hatred are mobilized. This is also very practical for prevent workers because they need to know what to look at in their young people in order to be able to actually take action.
Thank you, Harald. Now I would like to move forward to the second topic, extremism among young people and its manifestation. So, Adriana, how do the sympathies of young people for extremism manifest? And what different forms of inclination towards extremism can be observed?
Ja si myslím, tie formy prejavov extrémizmu mladých ľudí sú samozrejme rôzne. Ja neviem nejako krátko rozprávať, pretože vždy mám pocit, že niečo nie je dopovedané. Asi je to tu.
Difficult to briefly talk about this topic because I think it's not done. But the forms that young people consider okay. So it is said extremism comes from some ideology. In the first, the manifestation of extremism in young people are not extremism, but more social because they need some social contact and they look for the social contact in many other ways, and there is raised the questions where they find social contact, but also the manifestations of extremism are verbal or violent, or they can be other forms of manifestation according to where the young is brought up, because sometimes when he is raised in some manners, he or they can see whether it is extremistic or not because they take it for granted. And also there is many groups which are extremistic, but they not define themselves as extremistic. For example, football hooligans, which sometimes violent represent extremism. So extremism manifestations are very different, but we need to define the latent manifestations of extremism, because from the latent extremism it can become very serious extremism, because it could raise into some party which is extremistic.
Michael, I know you have some experience here too. Can you share, please, your experience from the city of Oslo?
Okay, so the question was, what is associated with within people's mind, or?
Yeah. We are on the second topic, extremism among young people and its manifestation. So you certainly have a few experience from the city of Oslo. So,
yeah, I think that there is no single answer for this, but the both physical space and the internet are important arenas for expressing extremistic view. To give one instance, in Norway we have had several manifestations with burning the Quran, with right-wing groups are burning the Quran, and they have the right to do that. So they have the constitutional right to burn the Quran, but it also have this is kind of to give one example, that the internet have become an increasingly important arena for extremists, and also in different subcultures, and where they can engage in their ideological fellowship and recruit and radicalize new supporters and train and dedicated activists. But even though there are many persons engaged in extremistic activities online, they're not necessarily capable of organizing in the real world. It's more available now, so the extreme have become more normal and more accessible, through the social media. And I see that we are very behind, that process. So I think we have to think very innovative how to reach out and how to work with social media. So in both extremistic Islamic, it's the internet, but also family and friends that can, that within Norway that can have influence. But in the right wing, it's mostly the internet that caused the radicalization.
Thank Michael. Maybe Harald, could you tell us what are the typical ideas of the world from the point of view of extremists, and what are the characteristic features of thinking and acting?
Oh, I can make that short. In fact, I think the major motivations, and let me speak about the motivations first, because the the modes of action, as I already said, sort of the usual black and white reactions. But I think the motivations are sometimes quite, quite socially oriented, and much appreciate what Michael, I think it was, said about, the socioeconomic circumstances of many of the, so-called radicalized young people. It's a basic motivation is actually to belong to a group. For a young person to join any of these hate scenes or violent extremist scenes, it's just the sense of belonging, or in many cases also the personal, the individual need to find some sort of a surrogate family, so sort of a replacement family, which was also already mentioned by the speakers. How young people grow up in their families and in their neighborhoods plays a tremendous role in what motivates them, or what defines their resilience against the quite luring and attractive offers that extremist organizations often make for young people. So this is basically the sense of belonging, sense of having a family. They might attach to it certain types is also what in psychology is sometimes called thrill seeking, adventure seeking, to sort of the pre-ideological urge to do something exciting. Another more intellectual impulse is to be beyond doing something exciting and belonging to a group that is doing that jointly, is to actually be able to do something important. So there is the dimension of the individual's urge to feel, to have personal meaning. So all these, if you look at this, there's other motivations, but if you look at these basic motivations, you can clearly see what's already been said in the panel, and it's very valuable, is that we basically have to take care of young people across the board, which to a certain extent means that we shift our perspective for looking around and trying to hunt down possible terrorists of the future, but rather take a position of sort of the social caretakers that work together with education systems, with schools, and with social work, school social work and others, and just try to pick up kids who prove vulnerable. The last point, ideology is always part of extremisms. If it comes down to young people or not so young people being engaged in pre-terrorist or actually terrorist actions, ideology has across the board proven to be a rather weak factor in that, or only with selected individuals who prove them to be highly ideologized and intellectual in what they're doing. Most of the people are motivated more on an emotional and social level. So ideology is often much less important with the young people than we think, and it's much less important for us as prevent workers than we generally think.
Thank you, Harald. Adriana, so how can an individual's inclination to extremism be explained from a psychological point of view, from your point of view? And which social causes do you consider as the most significant for the development of sympathy toward extremism?
As I said, extremism is defined in many point of views, and there is many causes why people inclinate in extremistic attitudes, or except in socio-economicals, and it is considered the most powerful why extremism is here, because in bad economical conditions people are frustrated and tries to find a sure way from bad situation. And for example, if politicians doesn't give enough information how to survive bad times, people rather inclined to extremistic ways. So I think this point of view is the most important in current situations, and also in terms of psychology, something was said, but the individual character of people also draft our behavior, and German philosopher Theodor Adorno devotes his life to research the authoritative character of person, and he found out that people which are authoritative, they have tendency to suppress the weaker and also be suppressed by the stronger. So I would like to add that it is not pointed the causal cause that if someone is raised in extremical family, they should be extremist, but there is a tendency so the tendency of submit to our family is, so
Perfect.
there
Thank
is
you
also
for your
the
answer.
danger.
State Secretary, what do you think, what role does political culture play in this process?
Of course, very important one. Maybe our colleagues from Oslo could say a little more how high developed democracy, Norwegian democracy is, but we still can follow quite a lot of pictures of extremism, including a very tragical one, as we had the possibility to see a couple of years ago. So that's why also political culture is very dynamic, and we need to work with that. And of course, we have to adapt to new environments. So political culture from 90s, it's a completely different one than the one we are having now. And we need to adapt, as I said, immediately when we see some defects or problems, especially inside of the young society. And I followed such a situation quite closely in 2013 when extremist became a governor of this region. I followed such a situation in 2016 when a same extremist group of people entered Slovak National Council, Slovak Parliament. And I'm of course following the situation from 2019 when two of these guys became members of the European Parliament, and two presidential candidates became quite successful. Let's not forget that Adolf Hitler has been elected the democratic way. Let's not forget that Czechoslovakia chose totalitarian regime in 1948 democratic way, in democratic election 1946. So these are very simple examples how political culture, however developed, should serve as a source of problem. That's why we need to very frankly speak about political culture in Slovakia, and we need to find ways how to manage this political culture. And I'm really appreciating all very concrete examples we had today, how to approach these people through families, through education system, through community organizing, through everything which is accessible for all of us, but we are maybe not using it as much as we should.
Thank you. Harald, Daniel, we are talking about the reasons for the attraction to extremism. So we are interested in your view, what role does political culture play?
Harald, do you want to go first?
I'm just wondering, can you repeat the question again, your last part? What role?
We are still talking about the reasons for the attraction to extremism, and so we are interested in your view. What role does political culture play in this process?
I'm sorry about that, due to the acoustic situation. Well, this political culture is tremendously important. I mean, you can measure political culture you can nationally, but you can also have a look at a school and a certain school and how it is organized in terms of how the classwork is done, how decision making in that school is done. So there is various local forms of political cultures that are important, and those are generally also the aspects of culture that we can have an influence on and actually change rather quickly. As a German, it's for me, of course, it comes to mind that East Germany and West Germany, and we have these two different political cultures, and it was quite astounding to as a West German to sort of do some analysis on East German culture and how it dealt with the right-wing extremism that has always been there undercover to a certain extent. And at the time of the GDR, there used to be sort of a resistance movement under the radar, or at least officially admitted radar of the state system. And yet there's proof that the former National Socialist elites have in fact contributed to the security architecture of the GDR state. So there is very tricky implications of the history of political cultures in Eastern Germany as well as in Western Germany, and they play a strong role in that. Just ending with one example, in working in Eastern Germany has for us, in terms of political and civic education and prevent work, has for us sometimes been challenging in that there was a generally apolitical stance, or I would rather say an anxiety about everything political. Even with the teachers, with the state agencies, and that is a general climate, a general political climate in which it is not very easy to do prevent work. So you have to spend some time to engage a certain amount of trust in politics and in democracy before you then actually can get to the particular issues to be discussed.
Thank you, Daniel.
All the previous speakers were associating extremism primarily with a kind of, authoritarian, right-wing nationalist type. But we know about authoritarian nationalist values in the last couple of decades in European politics is that economic marginalization might contribute to it, but to a very large extent, these kind of people who think in an authoritarian, right-wing, nationalist way, that's very much driven by also cultural transformation, by the kind of, very late, very long-term repercussions of the 1968 movement in Western Europe, for instance, which has created kind of, new divisions, new conflicts, and kind of, some people feel threatened by the social change which we are experiencing. In Eastern Europe, it's more kind of, people are afraid of losing kind of, in terms of their economic, social position, and therefore start kind of, rejecting this liberal new kind of, regime which we have. But the question kind of, how it's politically exploited and how it's turned into kind of, different political parties, political options, and how easy it is to also radicalize kind of, these people also is determined to some degree by the history of the respective countries. And by the history we are speaking, and I'm referring to research by Luca Manucci and Daniele Caramani, who are looking at historical legacy of the kind of, worst events which we kind of, are thinking of in European history, kind of, the legacies in particular of the Second World War, and the question how kind of, different societies have dealt with the kind of their own position in the Second World War and how history sees themselves. And so in some national contexts, it's very hard to pronounce certain arguments in the political realm, and it's very hard to translate authoritarian nationalist values into a political project. while in others, depending on kind of, whether the national discourse victimizes a nation, kind of, in terms of the Second World War, or sees them kind of, more as a perpetrator in other societies, is much more easier. We know much less about that with regards, or at least I'm not aware of comparative research having investigated the role of history in the manifestation of authoritarianness in the political realm in Central and Eastern Europe. I think it would probably be, from a purely academical point, much more exciting. I apologize if I use the term exciting in such a context, but from a purely kind of, academical point of view, it would probably be very interesting to see how different episodes of authoritarianism in history, kind of, we had the communist period, we had the kind of, Second World War in some societies, we had wars which were fought in course of the transition of kind of, the 1990s. It would be very interesting to see how these interact in terms of shaping the public sphere and what type of issues can be present today. But on this kind of, topic, I'm really not knowledgeable, and I would be very interested to kind of, see more research which has been done on that, or future research. That's just an avenue of kind of, thoughts which are present among my colleagues on this question.
Thank you, Daniel, for this interesting explanation. We are rather limited on time, so I would like to move to another topic, forms of political extremism. We mentioned left-wing, right-wing, religious, typical features which are present in the political views of the population, in political parties, and extremist organization. So on the content level, what are the differences between right and left-wing extremism? Adriana, Harald, what was that?
Ďakujem. Je to zložitá otázka, ale vlastne ani neviem.
It is very complicated to explaining. So the basic difference is the equity, because right-wing extremism is neglect the equity of people, but on the other hand, the left-wing extremism implicate the equity in every aspect of life. But nowadays, it is more talk about right-wing extremism, and Mr. Harald talked about also left-wing extremism, that it is getting weaker and it's less relevant. Also, I don't want to bagatelize this, but the basic principles the right-wing extremism comes from is except neglecting of equity. It's also racism, xenophobia, the faith of the strong state. I think these are the characteristics, but also the left-wing extremism comes from ideology of Karl Marx as well. But I think there is no room for...
Harald, please, do you think, or maybe do you think there are any common features with different types of political extremism, or what are the program priorities of the left and right extremist parties? And maybe you can tell us what is the essence of religious extremism as well?
Was that a question to me?
Of course, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So what are the program priorities of the left and right extremist parties, and what is the essence of religious extremism? sound, please.
Thank you. As Adriana already mentioned, I have already taken quite a stance on that issue, saying that right now for the last 30 years, at least in Germany, I'm not so sure about Greece. There hasn't been any left-wing extremism, which is worth the concept. Now, let me also stress, though, because I'm very thankful of the social workers' perspective that has already been taken. I think it was Daniel or Michael. As a practitioner of youth work and psychotherapy, I frankly don't care what the ideological background is. If I have a young person with a delinquency issue, or also a drug issue combined with a delinquency issue, or with a violence issue, aggression issues, I just I do my work, and I think this should be our main priority. Look at the young people and look at the challenges that they pose, and then try to do the best that we can. As far as left-wing and right-wing extremism, I'd like to share a joke with you, if I may. I'm not sure how that translates into English, but there has been a very pointed joke on this discussion about right-wing and left-wing extremism by a comedian who is actually, its image is a kangaroo. And this comedian says the following on the issue. He said, well, there is a very simple distinction between right-wing and left-wing extremism. Right-wing extremists, they burn people. And left-wing extremists, they burn cars. And then this comedian says, or the kangaroo says, well, I have no problem with right-wing extremism because, I don't own people or foreigners, but I own a car, and therefore I have a major issue with left-wing extremism. Now that's, of course, a joke, but I think it is a very wise one that we might have a second thought about, where we set our priorities, whether it's, group-focused hatred and hate crime, or whether it's more sort of the, youth delinquency against, possessions like cars, like windows and all that.
Thanks. Daniel, can you hear us? Daniel, your personal expertise, or personal research expertise is centered on the risk and consequences of extremist, populist political parties for democracy. So maybe could you please explain us whether populism and or extremism constitutes a threat to democracy?
As I previously mentioned in the introductory statement, there are two different views in the literature. There was one view which has been reporting over the past couple of years that democracy around the world is under threat because of the participation of extremists, usually within populist parties in government. We do not find such a homogeneous trend, in our own research, and other people who have, looked at this more systematically would get similar results. There is not such, a homogeneous trend that any participation of a populist party in government would lead to a decline in democracy. We have very, threatening signals, and we are very concerned with the state of democracy in countries which are governed by populist parties with extremist elements. In particular, people think of Poland and of Hungary in the neighborhood of Slovakia. People were very concerned about what is going on in Slovakia in previous governments, not the current government, though. I think Slovakia is also a good example, that shows that democracy is not automatically, abolished by all populist parties, even not, if extremists participate in the government. So what we more see is that there are very specific functions of democracy. which are under threat, which are closely related to the view by populist political parties that actually they are themselves the true representatives of the people. That's how we as political scientists today tend to define populism. We as the only true representatives of the people who are fighting against these evil elites. And we are representing the true will of the people by such also believing that there is no other possible truth possible, and rejecting pluralism as such. And this often puts at threat the media freedom, the public broadcasters also, which are coming under threat by populist governments. Sometimes there are ways also of restricting the freedom of private media to report. So we don't have the same plurality of views any longer being able to be expressed in the public sphere. It puts under pressure the justice system, but it only in very, very rare cases, Venezuela is probably the most prominent thereof, resorts to a real full-fledged authoritarianization of a country, and there are milder cases where we don't know exactly where to locate them in the gray zone, also in Europe, such as Hungary or Serbia, but it's much less of a homogeneous phenomenon that we would usually think.
Thank you. Michael, could you add something to this topic?
I think it's an important role. Democracy comes with a price. And I see that in Norway, freedom of speech is very protective, and it's a thin line of what is hate speech and what is legally accepted. So I think it's more about how the people respect and navigate in the freedom of speech. And I also believe that the people have to take more responsibility, and also how the politicians talk about groups with a specific religion or ethnical background. I've seen that many children are raised up with a negative self-narrative, hearing politicians and media talking about groups that they can associate with negatively. So that can be problematic for the feeling of belonging. And like Harald explained, that one of the main factors is the belonging, and also that can also be explained the situation in Norway, identity and belonging. So it's a very difficult issue.
Thank you. We can now move forward to our last topic. So how can liberal democracies be protected from political extremism at the local level? Mr. State Secretary, to what extent do we want to communicate with people who have radically different opinions? Do we internally wish for political segregation? How can strengthening civil society at the local level contribute to the coexistence of diversity of opinion?
That's a tough question, Mr. Professor. Thank you for that. Anyway, I will try my best. First of all, let's be aware that populists and extremists are offering a simple solution for very complex issues. And this is one of the main problems we are having, because, of course, most of the time, simple solution actually doesn't work in very complex societies like we are living in 21st century. And what we need to do with that is be a little more proactive. I mean, maybe debunk their hate speech, their fake news, whatever they are using as initial motivation or initial activity, which is bringing quite a lot of attention to them. So that's why I really appreciate that finally, for instance, in Slovakia, we are having good examples of debunking and proactive communication from Ministry of Interior, for instance, from Ministry of Health, and for quite a long time we are trying our best at the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, and I'm very happy to see Pavel Demeš here, who is helping us a lot with this issue. Thank you, Pavel, for that. And what we need to set up is strategic communication, completely different way than we get used to a couple of years ago, because otherwise people start to believe these simple solutions. And sorry to say so, I will not be diplomatic in this moment, stupidities we can read all around, especially social platforms, but also inside of our families, we are having possibilities to hear some of them, and situation becoming critical. So this is the way how to somehow manage it, how to protect liberal democracy, and finally come from words to acts. This is inevitable from people who believe in values like us, and then we can help to survive our democracy. Although, as I already mentioned a couple of times, it is very fragile. And if you're asking me what is in front of us, what's our forecast at the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, if it comes to also this topic, let's take a look to France's presidential election, which is taking place in March or April 2022. I'm leaving to Paris tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to learn about what's the situation like over there, and we are going to speak also about the French presidency in European Council, which will take place in the same time, first half of 2022. And then from my point of view, but I believe also from European and Slovak foreign policy point of view, critically important will be United States midterm election in 2022, because they could easily prove that Trump time is not over. And I'm quite afraid of that. So we need to work hard as much as it gets at the European and Slovak level, of course, if possible, also global level, to debunk and to motivate people to confront all the information they are getting from different sources, if it's really true or not. And this is what all of us could help a lot. So please don't give up. This is my message to all of us, because guys on the other side of the front will never give up. I'm sure about it.
So what are the key challenges facing the development of civil society in the context of its growing polarization? I mean, values, social polarization, cultural differences, etc., etc. Harald, what do you mean?
Well, the question basically is also the question before we discussed is, how should we talk to each other? To what extent should we talk to each other? How do we talk to our adversaries politically? I think this is going to be a key issue. Democracy is about people who talk to each other. And if they lost the basic thread between them that allows them to exchange, then we have to reestablish that thread. Now, the question is how to do that, how to actually strike up a conversation with someone that A, you don't share the same value system with, B, you might not even like the person, C, you might even be scared of the person. How do we get to the point that we can actually reestablish a significant personal exchange that helps us to de-escalate and to depolarize? I can only, I prepared a link for you. I can point you to what's something that we are actually doing in schools. So I'm shifting the perspective a little bit away from the political discussion or from your town hall meetings or debates as we have them right now on stage, and go into schools and raise the question, well, how should young people learn to talk to each other? I think there is many things that can be done, and there is much more that should be done on the school level to actually teach and support the basic capacity to have a conversation. And by that, I mean not necessarily a discussion. In fact, I pretty much mean the opposite, because I think the basic social glue that connects us is personal conversations that rather consist of sharing personal experiences and getting second views from the other, and also hear his or her personal experiences. Now we call that group work in school. It's basically that you offer an hour for half of the class, each half of the class in a separate room. And the group talks about whatever they want to, and you make sure that they don't get into heated discussions, but share the experiences that they actually have, the individual, personal experiences. And then you learn, as the English say, where the person comes from in his or her opinions or views, where he or she comes from in terms of personal biographical experiences. So I post that link for you.
Is it okay now? Can you hear us? No. No sound. So it's okay now? Perfect. Sorry for interruption. Can you hear us, Harald, now?
Yes, I hear
you. Perfect, thanks. Okay, so thanks for your explanation, and I think there is Daniel. Daniel, could you add something to this topic?
The opportunity, thanks. I see myself here in the minoritarian position, not because of the opinion which I have on this issue, but I think on the particular kind of, perspective which I put on it. I think the kind of, different perspectives were most clearly, could be most clearly represented by State Secretary Klus was earlier making statements about algorithms and bots, and I agree with him. And can you, so the main question of other people in the round and very important points which they make are about how to prevent the radicalization and polarization of societies. But we also know that authoritarian values and social polarization are a reality, and in some societies quite stable among the large population and among the political elites. And so the question is, how do we deal with such polarized societies where one part of the society can simply no longer accept the present regime and turns anti-system? And I can't give you an answer to that. I need to alert you. I see a genuine dilemma in that. The French approach, we spoke before of France, is the cordon sanitaire. So let's exclude, it doesn't function any longer very well, but for decades, they were just excluding the extreme right from all possible positions, not talking from them, just putting a wall around the extreme right. Now, the European country which currently has probably the hugest problem with extremist actors and where the state is threatened by extremist actors is Bosnia and Herzegovina. And one of the moments which have led to the current polarization, probably it was just a pretext for it, was the change of the criminal code of Bosnia and Herzegovina, whereupon now it's forbidden and under punishment if you deny the genocide which has happened in Srebrenica against the Bosniak Muslims in this part of the country. And this is a very, very divisive issue. And it would probably take us lengths to discuss what is extremist about it or not. But to me, it's clear that if somebody denies a genocide, thereby also denies the most essential basic human rights, human dignity to a very large group of the population of a country. This is beyond anything what is acceptable as a democratic value and is outside what I would call the democratic realm. So for me, it's extremist. Why is it a dilemma? On the one hand, I agree we shouldn't talk to somebody who denies and glorifies war crimes. That's unacceptable for the victims. On the other hand, and why I bring up Bosnia and Herzegovina, It's if by doing so, you alienate the entire Bosnian, Serbian political elites and a very, very large part of their electorate. So the largest part of Bosnian, Serbian, citizens from the political system, you exclude them and they can no longer participate in the state. There are two Nobel Prizes which I find particularly interesting in this context to move a little bit beyond and back in history. There were Nelson Mandela and Frederick William de Klerk, who won the Nobel Prize for bringing peace to South Africa, Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat for their attempt to to bring peace to the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts. And two of them in both pairs, you have a history of at least one of the actors being considered as an extremist, violent, anti-democratic. And today they are remembered because of their contribution to the peace process. And when a country is deeply divided, we really face a dilemma whether we want to speak to the extremists or exclude them, because if the extremists represent a very important part of the population, maybe the only way to resolve the social problem which we have is through exclusion, no matter who you have at the table.
Thank you, Daniel. We are almost out of time, and I would like to ask my colleagues that is there any question on the... Yes, one question. Can you translation to Daniel, or maybe you can answer firstly, and maybe you can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. The question was how to deal with the people who are lying, using fake news, and what else? Well, all of the profiles we know. I already mentioned it a couple of times. If the question is up to me, I should easily answer that we need to develop new rules, especially for social platforms, how to deal with fake profiles, with bots, which are very active at the social networks, and also we need to deal with artificial intelligence, which is now heavily abused at the social networks. If it comes to the real people, that's a completely different question. Whether we like it or not, these real people has a guarantee of freedom of speech. But as a liberal, I can easily say that their freedom is always finishing at the same line when my freedom is starting. So we have to be careful about that, and of course we need to find a way how to manage it. And for me, it's quite surprising that there are some extremists in Slovakia which are still not in a jail. On the other hand, they are part of Slovak National Council. So this is a critical situation, and we need to show people examples that red line has been crossed. Maybe this is not a very liberal approach, but if we will not use these examples, I'm afraid what will continue.
Thank you, Daniel, Harald, Michael. If maybe since we are almost out of time, in 30 seconds, please, what is the main message that would you like the audience to take away? Maybe we can start with our guests from abroad. So, Harald, Daniel, Michael. What is the main message that you would like the audience to...
My main message would really be to focus on the younger generations. So give more attention to what we actually do in our school systems and in education, and rethink schooling as we do it right now in Europe.
Thank you.
I don't have a clear answer and solution to all of that, but I think one thing which we were debating throughout the debate, which would be a solution to lots of it, including to the bots and to the lies. We don't need to punish them necessarily if we have a strong, credible, independent, also state-independent public broadcaster, and if we strengthen the media freedoms to create strong, independent, also financially independent media. Won't resolve all, but many things.
Thank you. Michael, what's the final piece of advice you would like to give the audience?
I have three of the short points. I think the civic sector have a very important role because they work daily with contra-narrative, anti-radicalization, they regulate the debate. And it's important to give a voice to diversity as well as being a watchdog for democracy, tolerance, and inclusion. And also an important question, to what degree extremist actors should be given voice or a media attention. The established media in some cases has given extremist actors extensive visibility and played an important role, a part in normalizing and mainstreaming far-right beliefs. And also focusing, like Harald said, on the youth. So building a democratic culture based on participation, critical thinking provides the best counterweight to attitudes that threaten democracy, such as group-based hostility and anti-democratic ideology.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Mr. State Secretary.
Well, I already said my main message is that never give up. It is very important. Every individual voice of us in this topic is critically important. So please do your best and don't forget that if we will stay silent, fragility of democracy in every single country will be even higher. So this is my main topic or main message also from the Human Forum 2022. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Adriana?
Ďakujem. Niečo už bolo povedané a myslím si, že základná
but I think the basic message is that many problems comes from not knowledge. So I think education is very important, and also sorting out issues, as well political issues. But I think the education is important to become in the Aristotle's equality, but I think it is a long and hard journey, and it could be dealt with it not only in a local level, but also globally.
Thank you, Mr. State Secretary. Thank you, Adriana. Thank you, Daniel, Harald, Michael. Thank you, our fabulous speakers and great audience for participation on this first panel. Thank all of you for this engaging, dynamic conversation, and I'm sure that this high-impact panel discussion was valuable for both the audience and the panelists themselves. At the end of this amazing discussion, I just want to say it was my pleasure and honor to be here with all of you. I would like to thank all of you for joining us today and thank the team that involved to putting all this together. And please join me and express many thanks to our distinguished guests.
Ďakujeme veľmi pekne a ďakujem aj pánovi profesorovi Teremovi za vedenie tejto diskusie. A ja len teda pre tých, čo nás sledujú na Facebooku, že budeme pokračovať 12:45, nie 12:30, lebo trošku sme natiahli tento prvý blok, ale to vôbec nevadí, len teda a prosím o trpezlivosť. Ďakujem pekne.